Hello and welcome to the third video in the Tiger VQ, the Tiger Viewer Questions video series. The video series where I answer the most interesting questions I can find in the viewer comments on the channel. And today's question is coming from Amin or Amine. I'm sorry if I haven't quite got your name right. And it's a great question about Visual Basic coding. So let's get straight into the spreadsheet. I've got the question here from Amin or Amine, as I said, and the question relates to one of our Excel VBA for Beginners video series, and I'll put a link to this video series in the description for this video. I'm not going to explain all the code in detail in this video, but you'll be able to go back to that video series to understand what's going on. But the purpose of this spreadsheet is we've got a small database here with some employee details in. And what we're trying to do is to translate each line of the database, into an individual employee review report, into an individual worksheet. So potentially very time consuming if you had to do that manually. In the video series, we automated it using VBA. So Amin has watched the video series and he's come back with some really good questions. Now the first one is, and we're just going to deal with the first one in this video, what code do we need to avoid creating duplicates? I mean, if the sheet already exists, then can we avoid creating another sheet? And just to illustrate that point, we can see in the spreadsheets at the moment, we've got multiple sheets in there. I've just run the code before I started filming. So we've got a sheet in there for each employee number, 472, and the first employee in the database is 472. So if I try to run the code again now, the code to duplicate the sheets and to create a record for each employee, if I try to run that code now, I'm going to get this error message. Why are we getting that error message? Well, it's because Excel is trying to name a sheet, and in the code we've told it to use the employee's employment number to name that sheet. Now that's a problem because there's already a sheet in the spreadsheet with that employee number. So we're trying to duplicate a name. That's going to create an error. Now that's quite annoying. And this video is about, what can we do to avoid that? We've got some code here that's working pretty well, but how can we tweak it? How can we refine it? How can we get it doing exactly what we need it to do? It's a good example of some advanced coding techniques. So how are we going to get started with this? Well, let's go into the code. It would be a good idea to use the F8 key to step through the code first to try to understand what's going on. But just looking at the whole routine, I can see there's a main construct here, and that's this for next loop, and that's looping through each line in the database, going through each line in the database and creating a report for each line in the database. So that's the main idea of the code. Now we need to build a mechanism in at some point, a mechanism to check if there is already a sheet in the workbook with this employee's employment number. We need to have a quick check to see if there's going to be a duplication. So we need to check that, probably going to use a conditional statement to check that, and then go through the code. We only want to run the code, we only want to create the sheets if there's not already a sheet in the workbook with that name. So that's what we're trying to do. It's important at the beginning, when you're starting out with a coding task, to get it clear in your head what you're trying to do. Annotations can really help you do this. Typing in some green annotations in English can help you understand. But when we're struggling with code, often it's not the technical process of actually writing out the code, it's the fact we don't understand clearly enough in our own heads what we're trying to do. So trying to articulate it, write it down, articulate it out loud can really add some clarity to what you're trying to do in your head and save some time later on. So we're going to need an if statement here. And what's the if statement going to do in a technical sense? Well, we want to take the proposed name of the spreadsheet, which is the employee number, take that employee number and then check it against all of the sheets in the workbook. And if the employee number equals the name of one of the sheets in the workbook, then we don't want to continue, we don't want to create the duplicate. So in a logical sense, that's what we're trying to do. I've already done some preparation here. I've created 2 new variables to help us do this. So I just mentioned we're going to want to loop through all of the worksheets in the workbook. Now we can utilize one of Excel's collections to do that. Remember, Excel kind of constructs itself in terms of collections of objects. There's a collection of worksheets in the workbook. There's a collection of cells on a worksheet. There's a collection of open workbooks as well. The collection we're interested in is worksheets in the workbook. So rather than saying, loop through this and that, we can say loop through something you already know, something you're aware of, loop through this collection, do something to each of the sheets. So that's the idea of what we're going to do. We have to declare a variable to work through the worksheet. So I've said Chris sheet as a worksheet variable, an object variable there. We've also got this Boolean variable, which we'll come back to in a second. So how are we going to loop through all of the sheets in the workbook and check the name and then take it from there? So a for next loop is going to help us, and we're going to use for each loop. And for each Chris sheet, that's the name of the variable that we've defined at the top here. For each Chris sheet in, now how is this going to continue? Well, we're going to use the collection of worksheets. Let's just say worksheets. I think that will do the job. And then next Chris sheet. So we've created a loop there. It's good practice when you open the loop to close it straight away, just how I've done there, so that you don't forget to do it later on. So for each Chris sheet in worksheet, so in English, for each worksheet in the workbook. Now we want to establish if the name of the sheet we're looking at, we're going to loop through all of the sheets, if the name of the sheet we're looking at equals the employee number of the employee in the database. Remember, we're just working down the database. So we want to look at the employee number. Does the employee number equal one of the sheet names? This is what we're trying to do. So chrissheet.name, that's the name of the sheet as we loop through the sheets. And then we need the line of code to give us the employee number. Now I've left an annotation down here, employee number. You can see I'm benefiting from the annotations now. And this line of code here is b8.offset, and then we're doing a downwards offset from b8. So where is that? b8 is just here. So that seems to make sense. That seems to be the information I want. It's the employee number information. So with a combination of annotations and looking at the code, looking back at the spreadsheet, I've been able to establish what's going on there. So recycling code that already works is always a good idea. So I'm going to just paste in the code here. And then we can finish the if statement with then. So if and then, these two ideas go together. Okay, so we've got our for next loop. That's going to loop through all the worksheets. Inside the for next loop, we've now got this conditional statement. And the conditional statement in English is saying if the name of the worksheet that you're looping through equals the employee number, then I want you to do something. Let's put an annotation here in English. So if the name of the worksheet equals the employee number. If that's the case, then we do not want to create this sheet. Not want to create this sheet. There we go, some helpful annotations there. You'll also notice I've done some indentation here. So the for and next commands, the same level of indentation. The if and end if statements, the same level of indentation. That's going to help us to understand what's going on. So what are we going to do? So if, we've established that this sheet already exists in the workbook, so this employee already has a report, what are we going to do? What mechanism are we going to use to stop Excel running the code? In effect, we just want Excel to stop there. We don't want Excel to run the rest of this code. Well, one way to do it would be to use a Boolean variable I've declared at the top here. I've called this variable already present, giving it a very informative name. We can tell from the name of the variable what its role in the code is going to be. Now, a Boolean variable is true or false, and in order to control what happens later, if this is the case, let's set already present to true. And then later in the code, we can reference this variable in order to control whether we run the code or not. This is what we're going to try to do. Okay. So let's look a bit further down the code here. And down here is the code that's creating this report and then inputting the information on this report. Remember, each of these reports contains this employee information. This information comes from our original database. And we can tell from the annotations that that is what is going on. So if the sheet is already in there, then we don't want this code to happen. So how are we going to do that? You might want to stop the video. You can use ideas we've already used in order to solve this one. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to stop this code running? Well, one idea would be to use the Boolean variable. Now, if the Boolean variable is true, that means that the sheet is already present in the workbook, and therefore we don't want to run this code. We only want to run this code if already present is false. So this seems to do the job. I'm going to put an annotation here. Only if sheet is not present. There we go. And one thing I often do, a little tip, is to copy paste the same annotation at the beginning and the end of the if statement. That helps us to understand what's going on. I'm going to adjust the indentation here too. So what we're saying is, we've got an if statement here, only run this code, only run the code that creates the reports if the already present variable is false. The already present variable will be false if we haven't set it to true at this stage. And it will be set to true at this stage if the employee number is the name of one of the worksheets in the workbook. That's how the whole thing is working. Don't worry if you don't understand it yet. By running the code, stepping through the code, should be able to develop an understanding of what's going on here. Now, one more thing I need to do is this already present variable requires a little bit more control, because at the moment, if this became true, then we'd want to reset it to false for the next employee. So we need to control this variable, reset it. So I'm just going to drop a line of code here to set this to false. And a nice annotation, just say initialize Boolean variable. There we go. Okay, I think we're ready to get going now. So let's create a situation. Let's create a situation where we're trying to create a sheet that's already in the workbook, because we've created a mechanism in the code to deal with that. So let's test that. Well, I've already got 472 here. Okay, let's just delete the sheets, duplicate the sheets. There we go. Okay, so the sheets are there. I've just run the code. So if I click duplicate sheets again, I would expect these mechanisms to kick into action and for them to prevent Excel trying to duplicate effectively these sheets. So let's step through the code. I'm going to use the F8 key here, stepping through the code. There we go, stepping through the code. Now, we did see there, I'll start that again. What we're going to expect to happen is, because we know the employee number is CO472, that's the name of the third worksheet in the workbook. So what we'd expect to happen is at some point, Excel will drop into this if statement, because at some point this line of the if statement will be true If it's true, it's going to go into the if statement. So it's going to drop into this if statement. We're going to see it switch this variable to true. So it's saying this sheet is already in the workbook. Let's step through the code, F8 key. Okay, and the third time, because it's the third sheet in the workbook, we can see it's gone into the conditional statement. So it's set already present to true. And it's going to keep going through the worksheets in the workbook. Now it's finished going through the worksheets in the workbook. And this is the second part of the code. So this is where we're actually creating the report. We've put an if statement here to say only create the report if it isn't already in the workbook. So what do we expect to happen when Excel executes this line of code? By hovering the cursor over the variable, Excel will tell us the value of the variable. So already present is true. So this condition is not met. So we would expect Excel to jump down to the bottom of the condition and to not run the code in the condition and in effect not create that report. So let's give that a go. And Excel's gone straight down to the bottom. Let's just run through this again. So it's now looking at the second employee. We can see it's dropped into the conditional statement there. So the same thing's going to happen. Already present is true. So we're not going to create the sheet. And then Excel is going to continue like that. We can just hit play and that will run through the code. So what's happened? Well, in effect, nothing's happened because all of these sheets are already present. So Excel has, through the code, through the mechanisms we've created, Excel has understood no sheets need to be created, so it hasn't tried to create any. Notice that there wasn't an error message from Excel. Let's just run the code again from the beginning. You see nothing is happening there. There's no error message from Excel. Excel is just running the code and completing it. Now to complete the testing here, what could we do? Well, it would be a good idea to delete one of the existing sheets. So let's delete the last sheet here, sheet CO646. Now we'd expect to be able to run the code. And we would expect for the last employee, we would expect Excel to drop into this conditional statement, to run the code into this conditional statement, and to create the report. That's the whole point. It's going to create the report. If the report isn't present, it's not going to create the report if the report is present. That's how the mechanism is working. So let's give it a go. So 646, we haven't got it 646 at the moment. Duplicate sheets, and there we can see 646 appearing. So I'm going to delete 646 and delete 680. Alt-H DS allows us to delete a sheet quickly using the shortcut. So I've now got 4 sheets here. When I run the code, I would expect 2 extra sheets to appear for 680 and 646. And there those sheets are. You'll notice there's no additional sheets, so there's a good level of precision in this code. Seems to be working well. So let's just review the code again quickly. So there's some very simple but powerful mechanisms here. Firstly, we've used one of Excel's collections, and in this case the worksheet collection. So we've said loop through, go through all of the sheets in the workbook. And that's allowed us to quickly understand if the name of the employee, not the name, if the employee number equals one of the sheets in the workbook. If that's the case, then we don't want to create the sheets. We've used this Boolean variable to determine what to do later in the routine. So there we're remembering the state of play. We're remembering that the sheet already exists. If that's the case, then we've said in this conditional statement, if that's the case, then we don't want to run the code to create the report. So we've got all these elements working together to create a really powerful routine. Variable declaration at the beginning. We've got this for next loop. We've got a conditional statement inside the loop. Then we've got another conditional statement. And then within these mechanisms, we've got code, fairly simple code to create the reports. Okay, so that's as far as we're going to go in this video. So thank you to Amin for the question. Hopefully that answered your question. Hopefully you found it helpful. Yeah, I think code really gets exciting when you start really making things work for you, tweaking them, um, really making them really precise and getting things done. I think that's when code gets exciting. So hopefully it improve your coding skills a little bit. So do put your questions in the viewer comments. I'll judge their educational value. Obviously, I can't make videos on all of them, but if I think it's a good question, I may consider making a video on it. So this is the Tiger VQ series. I hope to see you in another video in this series or in another video on the channel.